Yeah,
I'm gonna put myself on mute and switch off my camera.
Okay, welcome to Childhood and Society SIG today for our session that is recorded. I would like to welcome Emanuela Guaracello and Abel Longo, and who are presenting today, and also Nicoletta Sibo, who won't be with us, but her work is being presented from both today. So our session today for Childhood and Society in SIG will hopefully lead to a nice, interesting dialogue at the end of our session, with room for asking more further details about the research and to bring up questions. So the focus today for eco-pedagogies is poetry and utopia, which I can't wait to hear a little bit more about. What I will just begin to share with our audience is that our speakers today will engage with the role of poetry within eco-pedagogical perspective, based on Daniel Dolce's utopian approach, integrated with Hannah Ardent's theories on critical thinking and judgment. So everybody's welcome, and we look forward to our presenters taking the lead, and we'll wait to ask you some questions at the end. And I'll be chairing today, so thank you very much.
Many thanks, Angela. Yes, so as Angela said, unfortunately, Nicoletta Sibona isn't able to join us today. She's actually the teacher involved in the project, but in any case, you can find their email address here on these slides for those of you that are interested maybe to like to ask her something about our project. So this seminar focuses, as Angela said, on the application of Hannah Arendt's theories on critical thinking and judgment, and Danilo's Dolci utopian eco-pedagogy in the teaching of poetry in a year 5 primary school. It's in a class near Turin. So the study forms a project that was organized, led by the University of Turin in collaboration with the Middlesex University in the previous academic year. This project had two main objectives. So the acquisition by teachers of knowledge relating to the meaning of judgment skills, so their role in the decision-making process and their development in the child, and teachers' planning and implementation of educational and didactic activities for the formation of judgment within an eco-pedagogical perspective. So with reference to poetry teaching, the project examined how teachers can bring poetry and utopia into play in the classroom, more specifically guiding children through poetry to engage soulfully in their work together, offering children a perspective on poetry as an art form that awakens and enlightens, conceiving poetry as a process of relational sensitivity, and of an education through poetry aimed at the promotion of active and responsible citizenship. And now I hand over to Emanuela.
Thank you very much. First of all, I wish to thank you for inviting me in this interesting seminar. And then I can go on. The research process was conducted using a participatory action research approach. It is defined as participatory action research because there is no distinction between the experts and the people who experience the problems. It is therefore a question of developing a community in which experts work on an equal footing with the people directly affected, trying to develop a shared understanding of them and a unitary project. It is an approach that develops through processes of collaboration and interaction between teachers and professional researchers. Hannah Arendt developed a theoretical political proposal around the meaning and role of the faculties of critical thinking and judgment within the process of the formation of the individual. In her last and unfinished work, The Life of the Mind, and elaborates on what she calls the faculty of thinking, which deals with the understanding of the meaning of our existence in the world. Thinking is identified as the capacity through which we ask those questions are unanswerable, because they concern topics that do not have a definitive answer, such as freedom, death, beauty, or faith. Human beings ask such questions because our own humanity makes us feel an urge to search for the meaning of our existence, even though it is of no direct and immediate utility. This capacity to think, we can go on with the slide.
I think
This
it's
capacity.
still this one, Emanuela.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
This capacity to think does not exhaust all the activity of our mind. In fact, it interacts with the capacity to know, to observe the world through our senses. If the intellect makes us know the world for what it already is, it is only our reason that makes us understand the world as it should be. The dialogue between intelligence and thought is the only one that allows us to ask ourselves if what is concretely feasible also has such a meaning for human existence to make it right, whether it should be done or avoided, or if it is already done, transformed. Arendt was inspired by voices of Western philosophy, Socrates and Immanuel Kant. It was Socrates who first invited us to reflect on the indispensability of examining everything that happens. In fact, Socrates' Maieutic aimed precisely to dismantle preconceived or common sense ideas and to initiate, starting from the interiority of each person, a new, well-founded and dialogic vision of reality. Kant much later placed judgment based on taste at the center of his final reflections, namely that personal deliberative process that becomes necessary when we face those situations for which the application of rules established a priori would not be coherent. Starting from this framework, Arendt argues that to save the world from ruin, it is necessary for teachers to assume the responsibility of initiating, nourishing, and introducing into society the absolute novelty that each child brings. It is the originality that makes the child feel competent and special and allows the community to recognize them as a person with a real and significant talent for the prosperity of the community itself. To recognize oneself as a person with an unrepeatable originality and value for oneself, for others, and for all the community, it is necessary, Arendt argues, for two conditions to occur for the child: involvement in an educational relationship with adults and teachers, sincerely interested in promoting this recognition through proposals, experiences, and training opportunities that allow them to discover and test themselves, and the awakening and exercise of man's highest human capacity, the faculty of judging. Judgment, according to Arendt, is the faculty that allows one to examine oneself, recognizing one's originality and the potential. Judgment also allows one to evaluate one's own thinking process and behavior, to correct oneself and to understand the value of personal achievement. It is not just individualistic. Judgment allows all this not because it makes the child subjugated or passively subservient to socially defined norms of conduct. Arendtian judgment, on the contrary, allows all of these, since it is the faculty that places oneself, others, and the world under constant evaluation. An evaluation that discerns facts and ideas in order to understand them and proceeds in the decision-making process of what it is right to think and what is right to do. From an Arendtian perspective, it is vitally important to train the competence of judgment in the new generations to avoid the repetition of the scandal that shocked the 20th century, the extermination of part of humanity during the Nazi and fascist repatriations. Arendt states that this incurable evil perpetrated by human beings on other human beings was so rampant and affected such a high number of individuals engaging in violent conduct because they choose to suspend their thinking and judgment capacities.
Okay, so Hannah Arendt's vision of education has key points in common with Danilo Dolci's ecopedagogy. Like Freire, who endorsed Dolci's views and collaborated with him in various instances, Dolci's ecopedagogy aims to educate children to face everyday problems with action, creativity, and dialogue, guiding them towards growth based on respect for nature, the rights of all, and the culture of peace. His vision of the human world and nature as a unified whole is the essence of Dolci's method, which is known as reciprocal maeutics, and he himself also defined as ecological maeutics. Dolci's ecological maeutics is a dialectic method of inquiry that aims to stimulate the growth of consciousness by guiding the participants to listen to different points of view, acknowledging and respecting any contradictions that emerge. Dolci, like Arendt, was inspired by Socrates' dialectics, which compares the philosopher to a midwife of knowledge, eschewing the temptation to fill people's minds with information and helping them instead to use dialogue as an instrument to reach the truth. There is, however, an important addition that Dolci makes to Socrates' approach, making it reciprocal. For Dolci, educators are all those who are not only able to help others to teach themselves, but also those who will learn from others at the same time. Propedeutic to Dolci's reciprocal maeutics is communication, which is defined by Dolci as the capacity to develop through dialogue. It involves a spiritual tension that encompasses the body and all things and is renewed in a continual process of creative reciprocity. This process, via which people learn to express their personal power as part of a deep felt need to be creative, known as conscientization, can be linked to Freire and be defined as learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and to take actions against the oppressive elements of reality. Like Freire, Dolci fosters an empowered community, invoking a world in which humanity lives in nonviolent harmony with nature, coexisting in a perfect power balance as opposed to existing as a burden on and flourishing at the expense of others. A new future, according to Dolci, must be molded by every individual so that humanity acquires a sense of what is necessary to be able to make new choices, to learn how to imagine and bring into being new dreams. Dolci maintains that our worst enemy is the fear of being creative, the lack of courage, the inability to rouse ourselves from our deep inertia. Thus, in his poetry collection, Don't You Smell the Smoke, focusing on the atrocity of the Nazi concentration camps and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima, Dolci, like Arendt, when she references the Scandala, alludes to the destructive and terrible effects of being locked in a fearful conformist mode of thinking, arising from a lack of courage and inability to break away from the collective mindset. According to Gianni Rodari, teaching poetry is a sign that a higher civilization was born in that school, which teaches children that their role in the world must not be that of those who merely accept reality, who only execute and obey, but rather that of producers, creators, transformers of the world. He then adds that it does not matter if children leave school and no longer write poems, because it is likely that they will retain the need for poetry. And in any case, poetry will have been for them an exercise in freedom, an education in freedom, whose fruits will last a long time. As a fellow poet, Dolci also believed in the transformative power of teaching poetry at a young age through creative writing workshops aimed at developing both personal, group, and collective creativity. The teacher's mission is to help children embark on the arduous but necessary path to utopia. Utopia is dream, hope, and at the same time something more, becoming consciously aware of the dream and going on to make it a manifesto for one existence. Utopia, central in ecopedagogical discourse, is in fact understood by Freire as critical hope. Thinking is that hope alone can transform the world, can result in despair, pessimism, and fatalism. What Freire writes in Pedagogy of Freedom is that hope based on truth gives ethical quality to the struggle to transform the world. Freire adds that for this purpose, the capacity for suffering, a sense of love for people, and tolerance are needed. Utopia plays the role of ethical charge, which pushes for rigor and requires critical sense, which strengthens commitment and passion for the search for perspective, operational paths aimed at educational projects of high human depth. How can educators bring poetry and utopia into play in the classroom? Guiding children to engage in their work together and offering a perspective on poetry as an art form that awakens and enlightens. Through silent words, says Dolci, from the most varied matter, poetry enables us to express ourselves from infinite eyes, ears, tongues, infinite hands, and unpredictable seeds. Poetry for Dolci comes to represent a form of reciprocal maieutics. An example is provided to us by his poem Each One Grows Only If Dreamt, Ciascuno cresce solo se sognato, in which Dolci underlines how the awareness of not knowing must push us towards continuous research, how curiosity and interest in others are founding values of the educational act. Dolci gives us lessons on relationships with others, revealing how people can change if we imagine them differently, just as love makes them become more beautiful. The strength of a Maieute is therefore to encourage the emergence of all of that, of all of that is best in the individual. The Maieutic process awakens from deep within, allowing each us to identify with others through the authentic experience of growing together. Got here an extract from the poem. There are also those who educate without hiding the absurdity of the world, open to each development, but trying to be honest with others and with themselves, dreaming of others not as they are now. Everybody grows only if dreamt about. Now we'll go through what Nicoletta Sibona wrote for this seminar. So Nicoletta writes that inspired by Arendt's ideas on critical thinking and judgment and Dolci's Utopian Ecopedagogies, a series of poetry activities were carried out in a Year 5 class. The teacher presented the children with a contextual reality to focus on. Each child was thus encouraged to adopt an active listening mode, testing the experience to give life to an internal dialogue with themselves and with others. In this context, free poetic writing was born as a spontaneous choice by some children. For example, within an activity consisting of reflecting on Pablo Picasso's painting The Guernica, the painting created as an anti-war protest inspired by the 1937 aerial bombing of the town of Guernica. Children were aware of being able to freely write their sensation, thoughts, and interpretations regarding the painting. The teacher's role was to remain in the background and act neither as a constant guide nor as an evaluator of the work, looking for a predictable and exact result. This role of the teacher aims to encourage children to develop their own idea of poetry. As a result, some children decided spontaneously to write poems as a comment on the painting. Interestingly, some of the poems translated Picasso's fragmentary work into words, playing, for instance, on the free arrangements of words on the page, scattering them in different positions and with no more than 3 or 4 words on each line. A few weeks after working on the Guernica, the teacher proposed a poem on an ecological theme as an experience to be, inverted commas, tested individually and in a dialogue with others. The poem in question was Han desquajado un árbol, They Have Uprooted a Tree, by Rafael Alberti, a poet who went into exile after the Spanish Civil War. The poem, taken from Poemas de Punta del Este, sees the poet talking about a tree that has been uprooted, which in the morning was still young and happy, with the wind, the sun, and the bird caressing it, while in the evening it lies like a child exiled from its cradle with its tender legs broken. The poet concludes that in the night he will go out to close its eyes and sing the tree the song that the wind whispered as it passed that morning. The reflections written by the children on the poem highlighted how the poet conveyed sadness, but also a certain tenderness towards the tree. Some children highlighted how the poet wanted to communicate the importance of treating nature with respect and kindness. In particular, they noticed how the poet treats the tree as if it were his child, how the poem communicates the feeling of pain for the tree that was uprooted, both physical pain and emotional pain. Interestingly, they also drew association between the poem and the Guernica painting, since just as the tree was suddenly and violently uprooted, so Guernica was suddenly and devastatingly bombed, with young lives in both instances being needlessly and carelessly sacrificed. In the path of formation of thought and judgment, a new line of work from an ecological perspective was that of recognizing the universal value of cereals in the life of human beings. In this context, the teacher arranged bread-making sessions in class conducted in a free, open, and non-prescriptive way. Every child knew they could write about the immediate feeling of the hands working the dough, about having tasted the testimony of the bread maker, a person invited to talk to the children, who helped the children and talked to them about how she learned to make bread. Some children felt inspired to write poems as a result of the experience. There are also poems written using words from some Italian dialects or where their families came from. The possibility that the freedom to write poetry may nourish the child's self-perception as a valuable thinker is something to keep in mind in educational planning, and in particular, in view of the training of thinking and critical judgment, starting from early childhood. In some poems, the children brought, in inverted commas, to school people who had a special significance in their lives, something that they had never previously done, making teachers and classmates witness to their internal dialogue with roots and themes that had a deep and far-reaching significance for them. The teacher also proposed the experience of listening and reading poems in their Italian translation by authors of the ethnic origins of some of the children in class. Once again, poetry became an experience to be tested and gave rise to an internal dialogue in each child with themselves, with the other within the text, and as part of their class community. So to conclude, based on Arendt's perspective on the promotion of critical thinking and judgment and dolce psychopedagogy, the project adopted a participatory action research methodology that takes into account the needs genuinely perceived and identified by the teachers involved, proved to be particularly fruitful in terms of its aim of engaging in transforming society. The project explored the importance of bringing poetry to children and encouraging them to write it, leading them into deeper, more soulful forms of engagement in their work. Both their creative writing and the contemplative aspects of poetry were therefore nourished, revealing its potential as a form of language that awakens, disarms, and apprehends us as part of a process of personal growth and relational sensitivity. The many possibilities that poetry offers, as children were enabled to write about their feelings and emotions, recalling important personal aspects of their lives and giving space and words to experiences ranging from the individual to the universal, fully exercise their right to speak and freely interpreting topics and issues discussed. In the spirit of dolce and fredde psychopedagogy, the aim was to educate children to face everyday problems with action, creativity, and dialogue, supporting them in growth based on respect for nature, the rights of all, and the culture of peace. It is above all in poetry, even for those who experience their talent in this way for the first time, that something of their inner self is entrusted in an immediate, intense, and enduring way in words. Thank you.
Thank you, Abela. Thank you, Emanuela, for your very provocative and thoughtful presentation that will leave us with loads of questions and dialogue opportunities, I feel. I'll just do a kind of a little pull together, and then if the audience can think of any questions or contributions you want to come in with, and we can open up a dialogue, that would be absolutely wonderful to see what's been provoked, and if our inner selves will have been provoked to pop out. So Abel, if you could just stop sharing, that would be great, so we can all see.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mark, yeah, thank you.
I really kind of could feel the power of you know, we've got Ardent, we've got Dolce, and we've got Ferrer coming through in your theoretical framework to really provoke us to think about how poetry is used as a genre to bring out that inner self, that, you know, to contribute to the doing and the being of being human, and that everybody should be equally participating and empowered. And that's really powerful that came out there. And I like the methodology spheres that you use, just to provoke us to see how you managed data engagement and action. And again, thank you for the book about the life of mind. It's one that I will have a look at, and I'm sure some of us have been provoked to look at that, so we can all look at the meaning of our existence. I do wonder about that sometimes. You use some really powerful words as well: capacity, intelligent versus our thoughts, and what happens in those processes. And I think the poetry being used as a mode to kind of unpick intellect and thought, and bringing that throughout to be expressed through poetry was really powerful. And again, how imagination and our senses are being supported to be heard, to be expressed, you know, so those self-determined children can express themselves and be heard in a way that they feel safe to do so, and how those adults are conscious to do that. You know, it's such a provocative presentation. And again, I think the point that you're bringing about equal footing, and do we exist as a burden, or do we exist as somebody who isn't a burden? I mean, that's really powerful philosophical point to look at into at another point later. And are we conscious of when we do that? Are we conscious if we treat somebody as a burden or not? Do we do that in teaching? Does it happen through the curriculum? All these things really provoked with the power and the balance. So I guess I kind of summed up your presentation in a kind of a triangle. In my model brain, I always have models in my head. So I had poetry and utopia at the top, and then I had the expression of the self-determined child and the self-determined adult, and then the consciousness in the middle with dialogue on the other side. So there was kind of a nice, kind of manageable for me. So, and then the critical hope and the ethical quality of how all this is unpicking and unfolding were really powerful, and, you know, sort of danced as you went through your presentation. So lots of things there for us all to be thinking about in your half an hour, very well timed presentation. And the way that it translated into practice with the children kind of captured all of those points coming alive, really. So they're just reflections that I've shared from listening to you. I hope they made sense to everybody else, but in my brain, that's how they got fished out. So does anybody want to come in and discuss anything that was provoked with Manuela or Abella, or if Abella and Emanuela want to sort of respond to that, sum up, was anything missed that shouldn't have been, or anything came in that you hadn't thought of? I don't know.
Well, what I can say is that you wonderfully summarized what we tried to say. So, and that's very helpful for us, you know, to listen to as well. And yeah, so that's what we try to do. Thank you for that.
Jane, yeah, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It was really rich, and I have the privilege of being involved in the eco-pedagogy special issue, so I can have a read of the 6,000, 7,000 word version of this, and it will be published soon, so that's also very exciting. Yeah, there are a number of things that jumped out to me, and I think what's really interesting is how what we bring to this as researchers and thinkers and political beings, we take something else from it. So Angela obviously has appraised it and summarized in the way that she has because of her theoretical orientation and epistemological interests and so on. But for me, there were a couple of other things that jumped out that I thought were really fascinating, and I was hoping you could maybe expand upon. And one was this idea of poetry making with the youngest children. you know, the pre-literate, you know, quite what does, I can imagine what it might look like and the shape it might take, and the chaos that might ensue. But I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, you know, exactly the shape that it takes. I'm currently undertaking field work with 4-year-olds. And the best laid plans always just fall to pieces because of the serendipity and the chaos and the ways and places that the 4-year-olds want to take it. And not just the 4-year-olds, but the uprooted tree or the slug or the whatever it is. So I just wondered if you could expand upon a little bit about how that takes shape, and how, maybe connecting to Angela's point, how free the teacher and you as researchers feel to let things unfold in the ways that they'll unfold, rather than imposing some kind of structure or expectation of how things should unfold or you would like them to unfold. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was around the kind of crafting of poetry. In more general terms, and I find myself increasingly drawn to poetry, or rather poetry kind of coming out of me in ways that, you know, I do not feel remotely poetic, and I don't have any credentials, and I'm not an English language literature. I did it at A-level, but, you know, but somehow poetry, the more into particular philosophies I go, the more poetry seems to emerge from the work that I'm doing. But I always get the sense that I'm doing bad poetry because it's not technically correct. It's more, you know, what surfaces and what comes up, and it takes on a life of its own. And maybe that's the point. But I just wondered if you could elaborate on, you know, again, the freedom that's afforded and the space that's given to bad poetry.
Do you want to reply to the first one, Emanuela? I can do on the second one. What do you think?
Yes, thank you very much for these questions and reflections. I was writing the image emerging from the reflection of Angela. And also I written down the questions and the reflections of Jane, and I can start from the theoretical framework of this research and this work on poetry in primary school. Our idea is that new generations has to be prepared in the exercise of critical and creative skills, meant as the main skills that can be useful and significant to manage the challenges, the future challenges about environment, technological tools, social equality, that the future us and especially the future adults have to cope with. We think that one of the main educational experience that can exercise these skills, critical and creative skills, can be the aesthetic experiences. So through poetry, but also through arts in general, because they can be particular experiences can promote a contact with some problematic questions, topics of reality, with our creative capacities. So for us, the poetry could be a pretext to reflect about some bad moments of our human history, and also the experience with the bread can be a pretext to reflect about the possibility to be connected as human beings. One again about the theoretical framework, the second main point of our work is the necessity to work with children about the utopian thinking, meant as our possibility to work about a specific capacity to reflect about ideal matters, to the possible transformation of our society, also in positive ways. So, starting from the framework, both of these points are framed in the Deweyan perspective. We can think about art as experience, and also another work of John Dewey, Reconstruction in Philosophy. For the organization of the work, I think that it could be difficult for us as researchers and for the teachers have the capacity to render children free to express themselves without any direction of their thoughts. In this way, the teacher Nicoletta is a very good teacher, but also in the Italian school, this way of work is not so frequent. So we have to work with some teachers that are prepared in managing classes in this way. About the organization, this process of creative and critical thinking was promoting through some phases of work. First of all, working with very, very small groups of children that worked on the reflection about, for example, Guernica, or about the experience of tasting bread. Writing in this small group a piece of poetry or a piece of reflection that they can read to some classmates in a group of 10 children. And then this group can present in a plenary session the reflections and the poetry works that they have elaborated in these smaller groups. In our experience, maybe we can say 3 phases of work, a very, very small group of 3 children, then a dialogue, a deep dialogue among about 8-10 children, and then a plenary session can permit to each child to express his herself, and then to construct a group position about the topic of the Guernica painting or the topic of bread, and then to discuss with all the class about the topic, bringing in this discussion the personal position, but also the possibility to construct a common idea about the problem.
Jane, did you have a response to Emanuela, or does anybody else
So
want to
I
come
will
in?
answer the second question.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you,
thank you.
Emanuela.
Jane, so about good or bad poetry. First of all, I don't think that there should be such a distinction, but there's only poetry. And in our seminar with these teachers, I think this was highlighted very often in the sense that the idea was to just encourage children to write poetry without thinking about rules, conventions, I don't know, prosodies, and all of that, but just in a sort of very natural and distinctive way. Of course, for those that are really interested in poetry, in writing poetry, at a certain level, then maybe they can, of course, then, and this applies to the children as well, study rules and conventions, what is called prosody in general, and that, of course, it's, in my opinion, quite important indeed, to actually teach the basic of how poetry works, and of course, teaching that in a sort of very nice, through very nice activities with a very enjoying and enjoyable approach to it, because in the end, it's about musicality, it's about rhythm, it's about playing with words. So it's something in itself very joyful. But what I like to highlight is that something that I particularly discussed with these tutors was the fact that it, in my opinion, was very important for them to write poetry as well. It doesn't matter, whether they felt, that they had a certain predisposition or they were particularly good or not, but just writing poetry, even in terms of as a sort of a diary form, even as something to supplement and to support their work on a everyday basis. Because I think that's the best approach for those that wants to teach poetry, of course, to write poetry. And of course, poetry is in itself a revealing act. Yeah, it's only through poetry that we actually manage to say things that maybe just reflections don't manage to capture. And so this sort of way of self-discovering way that poetry allows to us, just writing in line, just breaking the lines. And so in other words, it's a matter of reconsidering poetry, because at least that my experience, for instance, as a child in Italy in school was, for instance, rather negative, because there was something, first of all, that it was imposed on, was a matter, you know, even of learning things by heart. And I mean, not just the poem itself, but of course the life, the poetics behind and all of that. And so it should be something, of course, very natural, something that comes as a sort of on a daily basis. So we should teach, learn, and live poetry as something that comes very nicely, and I repeat, on a sort of everyday basis. There's a very inspiring book, which is actually a book aimed at teachers. I wrote the name of the author on the chat. He's a French author, Bernard Friot. And this book has been translated in different languages. I don't remember now the English title. I couldn't find it, but I'm sure that if you Google the name, you will find these books. There are different lessons or activities rather, you know, that the Bernard Friot was very interesting educator in any case, advise teachers, you know, to follow, and they are very creative because they play with not just with words, but of course all of the references to other arts, the visual, cinema, music, and so on and so forth, you know, because of course poetry opens to all the other arts as well. But also there's this idea of looking at poetry or something that is a reflection on our daily life, on what we usually do every day, in what we experience, and what we feel. So, you know, I mean, I repeat, I find this book very inspiring. And yeah, so for those of you that are interested in terms of also, let's say, from a very specific practical point of view in terms of how to approach classes in delivering knowledge, let's say, as well on poetry, even how to write it as well, still with a sort of game-like approach. This book is definitely, in my opinion, very useful indeed.
Thank you, Abel. Two very deep questions asked and responded to, and I think they've generated more questions, again, just from both of your points, again, thinking about the technical, the creative, how we put ourselves in and how we begin to play with words, to be critical and to play with words and to kind of reveal our meaning and what we're thinking about. So many things that can be further discussed when we look at practice into theory, theory into practice, and, you know, so on and so forth. And again, we're discovering ourselves when we do the poetry and we engage with it, but we need those environments that are safe. We need trusting relationships, you know, from the adults. They have to feel safe to have time to do it. And again, this comes from knowledges of research projects in Europe for the last 8 or 9 years, where we have these intentions to do it, but if the adults don't feel safe, or there's a curricular pressure, you know, there's lots of issues that can stop this time to be revealing ourselves. And, you know, there's a power level of curricular environments, settings, adults, children, you know, before that poetry can be realized. So really powerful thoughts. So thank you both. And I think we've got time. Claire's had her hands up, so we've got about 4 minutes or 3 minutes left, because we like to stay on our lunchtime special because we know how busy everybody is. So Claire, if we can make sure that it's a question that we can answer in 1 minute for a question and 2 for an answer, perhaps. So we
okay, I mean, I suppose it's more a couple of comments. I mean, first of all, I used to work quite closely when I was coordinating a common module with a creative writing team, and in response to what Jane said, the creative writing academics used to say poetry was the hardest written art form. So, you know, I think that concern about writing bad poetry. The second thing is, I originally started teaching, when I started teaching, it was English as a foreign language. Abele knows this. And outside of university, when I was teaching sort of classes that people would just come to because they wanted to learn English, we used to do a lot of poetry, and it was quite interesting. People enjoyed playing with poetry, even people with not high levels of English, you know, what can be conveyed in a few words. But what was also very interesting was the cultural variation. So, for example, Japanese students could write very lyrical English because they come from a culture that values lyrical language. And without being sort of too stereotypical, the Germanic-speaking nations did not particularly value lyrical language. So they could write you beautiful argument essays, but found it incredibly challenging to write even the most simple sort of haiku poem, even with the sort of very clear structure of a haiku, because it wasn't valued in their culture. And that brings me to my personal experience. As a child, I loved poetry. I'm talking like primary school age. Loads of poetry books. I love poetry. I used to compose my own poetry. I also love creative writing. And then you go to secondary school, and I went to a grammar school, and there is absolutely no space for that on the curriculum. You are taught how to write the argument essay. And I mean, obviously that's a long time ago, and I've not been in schools since I was a school child. And I'm wondering, Jane, as a parent of teenagers, can you comment on that? Is that still the experience of the teenage child, that you know, you go to secondary school at 11, you love poetry, you love creative writing, you love all that sort of language play that goes with trying to be evocative with words, and suddenly it's like, can you make the nice argument?
Sadly, Claire, that's exactly how it is. There's the mechanistic approach to education just intensifies in the British system anyway, year on year on year, to the point that you're just regurgitating, you know, the formula. That's mostly what teaching in secondary school appears to be, is teaching from a formula, and then the students learn the formula, then they regurgitate the formula, and it's all about that. You know, there's very, very little space for creativity, and it kind of breaks my heart, to be honest. And that's why, having been in schools with 4-year-olds, it's like, oh, you know, you can feel it encroaching already, you know, that kind of standardization and regulation and containment and control. But by the time you get out the other end, it's quite sad.
And I suppose my question is, it's just an open one, you know, what can we do to try and create this important space for people to kind of articulate their self-expression, and therefore articulate their more inner sense of self, or the things that are important to their inner sense of self, in these more figurative ways, through language, through art, you know, rather than this very mechanistic, functionalistic view of education, which kills humanity.
And I think on that goes to the point mentioned earlier about the fear that adults continue to have when they look back and reflect back on poetry. There's a fear, like Jane, you were talking about a fear there. And I know Jane was running a session a couple of weeks ago, and she provoked us to engage with the limerick, and it was great fun. I was actually having something delivered at the time, and I couldn't engage with it, but it was something that I'd started and I didn't want to leave. So it provoked me to go back and have a go. I hadn't had fun with the limerick for about 20 years. And I still had to send it to her at some random time in the middle of the night, because I wanted to do it. And it was playing, it was fun. And I couldn't remember the technical aspects of how to do a limerick, because I hadn't done it for so long. And, you know, so there is a lot of human engagement and touch and feelings and empathy that come with all these points. I think we'll probably need to have another session with you both to carry on this discussion, or perhaps we can swap email addresses with everybody here to carry on the dialogue if we can.
Can I just say one sentence?
Yes.
I don't want to go over, but I think it's what everyone has said, is kind of reinstating the place of playfulness, you know, call that creativity, whatever you want, but, you know, it is about permission to be vulnerable and permission to play. And that's for all of us, from teachers, researchers, children. So yeah, that's I think potentially how we do it, Claire. We just embrace being playful.
And that's poetry as well.
Well, there's all that research.
The coincide, vulnerability and pleasure.
The ability to be playful helps prolong life.
Yeah.
Because it wards off depression.
Absolutely. And to be a bit silly and dizzy and have fun, you know, and again, the point that you mentioned, Emanuela and Abele at the beginning, to not conform, you know, to be an unconformist through your words and through your play with words, as I think Bakhtin reminds us to turn everything upside down and have some fun and be a bit carnivalesque. So I think we might thank Abel Longo and Emanuela for oh, sorry, I didn't say your surname, Emanuela. So Emanuela Guerca-Cello for your amazing presentation today and sharing your research. And I'm sorry that Nicoletta wasn't able to join us, but thanking her for her work and for her contribution and for sharing, you know, the stages, the process, the provocations. I know that we'll be able to engage with further, hopefully at some more dialogue in the future and some opportunities to network.
Many thanks to
Okay,
you all.
thank
It was
everybody.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for attending, and Adopo.
Adopo. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.